Video games have been an excellent form of entertainment for over 30 years. They provide fun experiences for players with wondrous adventures, worlds to explore, and characters to become attached to. But today, video games are changing, and for some, not for the better. Today, game companies have the ability to update games as they see fit even after a game has launched. Because of this, it is much easier for game companies to respond to a game's community when it comes to fixing bugs in the programming and adding new additions to the game. With the ability to add new things, companies have also begun to charge for these things. This is known as DLC, or downloadable content. Now, for the most part, there is nothing wrong with DLC, especially when it adds a lot of new content and new experiences. A lot of games tend to do this.
Typical release cycles before DLC was you once you did the game, that was it. You would move on to the next project. There wasn't much sustain. The sustain that was there was more for maintenance and stability and bug fixing than it was for adding to the game.
And today the market is flooded with games that include DLC and micropayments. There is a debate as to whether or not these things are good or bad. Most of the gaming community is against micropayments.
When you buy a game, you buy a game. You don't buy half of the game, then buy the other half later. You buy a game altogether at once, and if the company wants to charge a little more because it's a good experience or a good story, then you're buying the whole game and that's what you're going for. But if you're making them pay later on, that's a little kind of, if you may, scumbaggish.
While on the other hand, game developers can make a lot of money off of these and continue to receive revenue. Both sides seemingly in an eternal struggle against each other. Even though most gamers are against them, it is widespread throughout the industry. The best example is the App Store for mobile games. Browsing through gives you hundreds of games that include overpriced micropayments and downloadable content.
Microtransactions in general, I have mixed feelings on. I mean, it depends. It really depends on the market of game. I think casual games. Microtransactions are a good thing for indie studios and casual games, in the sense that it gives them ways to draw people in through a free product, and then allow them to then kind of invest what they want to invest into that game experience. It really comes down to the execution by that studio, on how well received that is and how well, I guess, I would think of that particular project. If you make a super small play experience for free, and then you throw paywalls up at everything, and you don't really give them much freedom to do anything long term in the game, then I think it's more like of a money grab kind of thing to me. That's my opinion anyway. But if your free play experience is something that you could do long term if you wanted it, and you can choose what level of investment you want to make into the game, I'm much more inclined to appreciate that kind of approach from a studio.
Now you're probably wondering, what are micropayments and how do they lure players in? Well, if you've ever played any kind of mobile game or game in general, you've probably encountered them before. Basically, they are small payments put into the game that you can purchase with real currency. This could be in the form of special in-game currency, cosmetic items, and a variety of other examples.
Micropayments can be a good thing and a bad thing for both sides of the industry, both developers of video games, publishers of video games on one side, and the actual consumers and players of the video games on the other.
Now, how do they work? Say that you have a $60 game with everything included, along with a few DLC options, and a free game with micropayments. You'd probably go for the game that's free because free is better, right? Unfortunately, this is not always the case, as developers find ways of making you need to pay money for in-game currency by limiting the game experience. This can be in the form of making the game too difficult, wait times, and ruining the experience for the player.
I really think it's not something developers should do. It's kind of a way to push someone into buying a product you really don't want to, and it's ruining the experience for that player. If you force a player into the corner and they don't have money, they're more likely to drop the game than to continue playing while buying that game, while buying that extension. So as I see it, I think that's pretty silly for people to do that, and it speaks kind of that company's character, and that's not a type of description you really want.
Even with these micropayments, some games have a large player base. Some of these games include World of Tanks, War Thunder, PlanetSide 2, and Warframe. These games are called free-to-play. They are free games, but they have micropayments in them. And free-to-play games do have these micropayments in because they're free. It's the only way that they can make money. Gamers usually say that these games do micropayments right since the payments are there, but they don't get in the way of the player advancement too much.
Free-to-play games are kind of shaky ground. There are many wrong ways to do it, and there are some right ways to do it. There's a game called League of Legends where there are many characters to play as. There are, I believe, over 120, and each character has a variety of different abilities and tools at their disposal to change how the game is played, especially with how you combine these characters with other characters within one's team, kind of like choosing what cards are in a trading card deck when you're playing with trading cards. The problem with League of Legends is that the player is restricted to how many characters they are allowed to choose from in any given time without paying for those characters. I believe the player only has a choice between 7 characters a week out of 120. It's kind of like playing chess and not having access to the rook or to a knight without paying extra for it, and you only have everything else. It's kind of ridiculous.
Here at Microsoft, I worked on Project Spark originally, which was it was a project that has microtransactions in it, and I'm supportive of the idea of what we did because it's not about the play experience. It's about expanding your abilities within that particular product. So I guess, yeah, I would, depending on if the game, if I felt like the game warranted it, then I would consider it, but I would never put it into a game just for the sake of having it. It would have to bring some kind of merit to that.
Now, micropayments do have a lot of downsides to them, but they also have some upsides. In most free games, there are options that allow the player to spend real money for in-game currency. The more money you spend, the easier the game gets for you. This can really cripple how a game's community balances itself. You could have a player that spent a lot of money on upgrades and against a player who spent no money on upgrades. The person who spent the most money usually wins in the end.
In-game currency, I feel, is unethical. It sort of distracts the player from the money that they are spending on the game. It sort of throws a disguise over it and maybe makes the money that they're spending look like there's less money. Seeing 500 points to purchase in-game content is much less financially stressful looking than a $5 or a $4.99 price tag. And I think developers should be more transparent and just do that.
I'm more of a fan of microtransactions being something that doesn't change the play experience or the capabilities of a character. So buying levels or things that make your particular character in a game more powerful than someone else is something that I'm pretty against, because then it's really kind of like a pay-to-win scenario, where you're going to get people that can afford to play or really want to and have the money, and they sink it in their characters and really build them out, and then the people that are just as enthusiastic about the game but maybe don't have the financial means to compete at that kind of level, they're kind of left out in the cold. And they have characters that they're not advancing at the rate of everybody else, and they can kind of feel left out, especially if they're playing with a group of friends and some friends pay and some don't. I don't particularly agree with the pay to win. I think it should be more like cosmetic and stuff like that.
But if it's just an aesthetic change, like a visual change, strictly that, like a different helmet that doesn't affect maybe like how vulnerable you are, then I think that's okay. I'm all for people expressing themselves, kind of like just changing clothing. Changing your clothes and going out and buying new clothes doesn't really affect other people or other players in this case in any way.
Another problem being faced is fully priced $60 games having micropayments in them.
That's a tough problem to solve, because making money in games is very difficult because of the overhead and the cost involved in building games. It's a very expensive thing to do, and most of the studios that do microtransactions, with the do are usually smaller indie studios. They don't have the kind of marketing and exposure to make money upfront on a game from like being purchased at GameStop or actually purchasing the entire game.
Now, some upsides to the micropayments is that it allows a game developer to continue to profit from a game that is free. It's basically a simple solution for developers, as they still need to make money to update the game as well as add new features to the game. Normally, games that are free that do not have micropayments lack in updates and added content. Developers of these games usually cripple players who do not purchase micropayments. One example of them doing this is with wait times. Wait times are usually applied when a player needs to, for example, upgrade a building or train troops. As the player progresses, the wait times get longer and longer. Some games reportedly going up to waiting weeks for one thing to be upgraded. Things called special currency come into play in this situation.
In-game currency is a tricky. It's again, it's the player's choice. Like, you don't have to. I think it's okay for companies to do that because they're not forcing them to do anything. If they do something outrageous like, oh, you need to buy this $5 pack to keep playing the game, there's a red flag thrown up there. But in-game currency, I think, is fine to charge extra if you want, just if the player wants a little extra cash. It's their decision to make. Again, they're not forced into a corner to do so.
This type of currency in games can only be purchased with real money. They can be used for special upgrades to make you better or skip build times entirely. This limits how a player can even progress in a game.
It's kind of a way to make more money, and I can't stress this enough. When you're playing a game, it's about the player. It's about what the player thinks of the game. And if you're forcing them into a corner like this, again, they're not going to play the game on. They're going to drop it. They're going to move on to something else. And that's not going to do so well for the companies that develop these games.
This trend has been moving up and up through the industry as fully priced $60 games are starting to include micropayments. As said before, their gameplay experience is limited by slow progress. Big companies like EA and Ubisoft are big examples for having games that include these kinds of micropayments.
Basically, it crosses the line with micropaying too. You get certain content, and either, depending on the game, can make the game or break the game, but it really depends on the companies that provide it, because some companies are just trying to still rip you off, try to get as much money as they can out of every game they produce. While other companies, it's more or less about the gaming experience and what the player sees, hears, feels, and experiences. And that's the type of DLC I'll buy. It's something that it'll make the game better. It's not just for profit. It's more of a player-friendly experience.
A $60 game can do micropayments ethically if the content for a $60 game adds to an already complete game. If the $60 game is already a full game without the micropayments and is satisfying to the player, I think it's okay if additional content is added, like maybe a developer commentary or maybe a reskin for your character, a new way to like a new outfit for your character to change how they look and to maybe express yourself a little more, or maybe even add more levels or content to the game, different ways to play the game in a single player experience. In a multiplayer experience, however, I feel that micropayments are something that should remain purely cosmetic, as some people say. It does, paying for these micropayments does not affect the gameplay for you and in turn affect other players.
With development, the overhead is high because you don't really start making money on a product until you've shipped it, you've completed it, unless you're doing something crowdfunding like Kickstarter or Star Citizen. Those things really aren't for profit, right? They're there to support the investment and the cost to build that product. So in order for an industry to really make money, they need to develop a solid product that's going to give them some kind of edge in terms of getting people attracted to that product early, so that the microtransactions can then provide additional development of features. Because a typical game like say Halo or Gears of War or Last of Us, those things are like a single entity. They're a game, and you ship the entire feature set and you ship the entire content, and there you go.
It seems like this new trend is just going to keep going and going, and there's nothing we can do about it. The market is now full of games that include micropayments, both fully priced games and free games. It seems that most companies just think that this is a new trend that they should do to make extra money. It seems that everyone thinks that pay to win is just the new way to go. While it may seem like it's the end of gaming, there is still light at the end of the tunnel. Companies can find new ways to create revenue for their game without micropayments. One example could be DLC. When a developer adds a significant amount of content in a DLC, it's okay for the company to charge for it.
A game I played a couple years ago had in-game advertisements in it. It wasn't very obtrusive. It wasn't an interruption from the gameplay experience. It wasn't like in a loading screen, or it didn't take me away from the game. The advertisement was actually located on a billboard inside the video game world. As my character was walking by on their mission, the advertisement for, I think it was like Coca-Cola or a car, was right there on the board. I hadn't seen anything like that before, and so I knew it was a paid endorsement by whoever the advertisement was, but it was within the game world and it felt immersive, and I thought it was thoughtful that it wasn't made obtrusive to me playing the game, and I was able to keep going. And I think something like that would be a good opportunity for developers to make additional money or revenue without disturbing the player or without bothering the player like microtransactions tend to do.
I'm kind of on and off, depending on what game it is, because some I think they're just scams for the companies out there to get a little more money in their pockets, while other companies really try to produce something that the gamers will like to play and will cherish and will use in the game, and not just try to rip you off for every penny, basically.
So microtransactions, it initially felt kind of like a fad, like a new trend in ways of making money, and I don't think that any developer in particular is super thrilled and all in on that particular business model. I think that if there was another way that a developer could get their product in as many people's hands as possible, and not have to invest in massive amounts of marketing and stuff like that, and indies could survive off of another business model, I really think that it probably would, I don't know if this would totally die out, but it would definitely become not as common. But currently there's not a whole lot of ways for an indie to turn around and to make a product have a decent amount of income without going with a business model such as that, or really kind of piggybacking on something that gets its marketing enough that they can get initial sales numbers high enough for the actual product instead of being in game.
Another example would be to actually keep micropayments in the game, but don't try to push players into buying them. Just have them there as an option, not as a necessity. Companies just need to find the balance between making money and player enjoyment. Player enjoyment needs to be the most important part in developing a game.
So I do like the model of DLC. I think that there needs to be a balance between what is included originally, like on a or digital download, versus what is DLC. I think DLC should be what it really is in spirit. It should be an expansion to the game, and it shouldn't be little chunks. I don't think it should be bigger chunks. I kind of like the way that BioShock did it with the episodic content. I think they did it right because it's a semi-standalone product in the sense that it's not a direct impact on the original campaign expansion and a tour through the alternate universes within the BioShock world. And I think I like the way they did that, and I like what they did with the Last of Us, and taking kind of like a prequel tour of Ellie before the actual story took place. So those kind of DLCs I'm very much in favor of.
Micropayments can benefit the developer of the video game in specific scenarios. If a player pays $60 for a game and decides that they really enjoy the game and that they would like more content and are willing to pay for that content, I think it's totally reasonable for developers to offer cheap ways or inexpensive ways, resource-efficient ways to add more content to the game and allow players to pay more if they want to. I'm all for that.
Today, games are flooded with micropayments. While there are good sides to micropayments, there are also a lot of downsides. Most companies think that micropayments are good and is a good way to make more money. Gamers think it's bad and is ruining game experience along with enjoyment of the game. Until the day that companies can find a new way to make money without limiting game experience, games like this will still be made and micropayments will still be charged against players. Most gamers are against micropayments, and the only way to get the message across to big game companies is to not purchase them. Until then, games will still be made, both fully priced and free to play, that will include micropayments.
My mind flows out, no